a written production of the Recreation Centers of Sun City Incorporated and is intended for the sole purpose of informing our Recreation Center members. Any duplication, copying, transmission, broadcast, or use, including electronic and social media, is strictly prohibited without the prior written consent from the Recreation Centers of Sun City Incorporated. Thank you for watching.
I'd like to start the planning session, and General Manager Cook is going to be doing the presentation.
Okay. President Lair, thank you. Board of Directors, thank you. So what I really wanted to do here is not to do a review of the budget. We did that with the Finance and Budget Committee, and most of the board was there. What I'm trying to do is, and I believe this is what the intent of this meeting is to discuss the hurdles associated with passing this 2023 budget. So I think the first one was the assessment increase of $29, which represents a 5.85% per property increase to $525. And then the second piece was transferring the unrestricted cash or carry forward to the capital reserves. Okay. So let's start with the assessment. So just to give a brief history, assessment started in 1964. I think it was like $6 when it started. It's increased 413% since 1964 through 1999. I just put that in there to catch everybody up and just make sure there's no gap in terms of the data that I'm presenting. So from 2000 to 2011, it increased 66%. 2012 to 22, it increased 15%, and we haven't had an increase in 6 years since 2017. So between 2012 and 2022, the rate of inflation was 29%. So we've only increased it 15%. So we really, over that time frame, have not kept up with consumer price index. Okay, so one of the things that's driven not increasing the assessment is that we, have been very fiscally responsible. Okay, so we have been able to build up a carry forward, right? But that's a double-edged sword. Okay, that means that there was, potentially less capital spending. So we didn't really drive a need for an assessment increase. And we've kept our wages historically lower than some of the other organizations within the state. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So just to do a brief assessment comparison for a two-person household. So we are at $496, Westbrook Village is $691, Sun City West $994, Grand is $1642, and Festival is $1740. So you can take that for whatever it's worth. So the increase justification. All right. First of all, it was unanimously approved by the Finance and Budget Committee. Okay. We haven't had an increase since 2017. In that time frame from 2017 to now, consumer price index has increased 23%. And it was, as you've seen this year, it's over 8%. I'm not sure if we're going to see a decrease in 2023 or not. At this point, we're seeing a slight reduction, but it's still higher than historic values. In that time frame, diesel fuel has gone up 114%, fertilizer 85%, the minimum wage has gone up 59%, utilities up 34%, seed 17%. So these are all expenses that we incur every year, and you can see that a lot of these are double digits, triple digit increases over the last 5 years. We've had increased capital and repair maintenance needs, so I refer back to the double-edged sword. So, if you slow down some of your capital expenditures and your repair and maintenance expenditures, sometimes, that will, and we're notoriously try and keep our assets longer and up, and in place longer than they normally, or the manufacturers normally allow, or say that their livelihood is. And that's a good thing. That is a good thing, okay? But that does catch up to you, okay? So the 2023 budget is $4.3 million, all right? And the prior 6-year average for repair and maintenance and capital and repair that we've budgeted is roughly $2.8 million. So we're budgeting a 54% increase for capital and repair and maintenance. And so, all of that money goes back into the clubs, it goes back into our facilities, it goes back into our equipment. So, we feel that this is, and we've increased our repair and maintenance budget by a considerable amount. And so we want to make sure that we keep our HVAC systems going. We've put in new HVAC here at Sundial, and so we want to make sure that we maintain that equipment, okay? So employee retention, right? We have 426 employees. We need to keep wages to compete. When I started here, turnover was 43%. Okay, we've dropped that down to somewhere in the mid-30s. Okay, but that cost of turnover is very expensive. It can be anywhere from 10 to 50% of an employee's wage. When you have to get them hired and then you have to train them, and that's very, very expensive. And so, we did a direct comparison with some of the other organizations in the Valley, and we are lower across the board pretty much. And you have to remember this: 2/3 of our employees, okay, they're Sun City residents. So we are trying to support our community as well, and making sure that, our community folks can maintain their payment of their bills as well. And then fiscal responsibility. I think that's what you pay me to do, right? You pay me to be fiscally responsible. So right now, we're budgeting a $2 million reduction in carry forward in 2023. And every year, we budget, for a deficit, okay, knowing that we have some carry forward. But this year is, larger than we've done in prior years in terms of budget. So no assessment increase, okay, will reduce the carry forward by an additional $1 million. Okay, that's assuming that we do no reduction in the capital and repair and maintenance spend if we don't increase the assessment. Okay, so where I came up with $1 million is it's roughly $750,000 for all of the members, the $496 per household. Plus, we have privilege cards as well that are associated with that. Okay. So if we don't raise it and we don't reduce our capital and repair and maintenance budget, that will represent roughly a $3 million reduction of the carry forward, which is 30%. So I don't know, I view that as, if you look at a household, that's 30% of our savings. And I'm not comfortable at all with a 30% reduction in our carry forward. And then on top of that, I believe that, we need to use carry forward from a reserve perspective, okay? So that's kind of my segue into the next topic. Any questions on what I've just presented with respect to the assessment?
No. Questions?
Unless you want them later. It's up to you.
No, you can bring it up
Okay.
now, sure.
You're going to increase the amount of work done from 2.8 to over $4 million. So I don't see how we're going to even accomplish that goal. And the other part is the lady from Clay Marionette was here and said the roof has been leaking for 2 years. We still haven't gotten it fixed. She said as of today it's still leaking. So I don't see how we're going to do an extra $2 million worth of work.
So That is something that Mike Weeprud and I, our Director of Building Infrastructure, had many discussions, and I've had many discussions with our staff to make sure that we can accomplish what we've put in the budget. And Mike is very confident that that can happen, because it's not just our staff that's going to do that. It's also vendors, so it's vendor relationships. So we've actually, as you know, we increased our project management staffing for the building infrastructure group. And with that increase in the project management staffing, we believe that the $4.3 million is something that we can accomplish. Remember that a lot of the repair and maintenance is done by the vendors in which we purchase that equipment from, and so all we're doing is managing the vendors for that work.
Thank you.
I'm hooked. Still, am I on?
Yep.
Okay. On that same subject, Bill, based on our quarterly third quarter report, we have about $400,000 left in unspent 2021 building and infrastructure. We have 2.9 million in this year, but we've only spent about 600,000. So we have 2.3 million roughly from 2023 expenditures. We're adding 4.3 million in next year's, and we have another over $1 million in other funds for building. That brings us up to what, $9 million in building and infrastructure funding. I'd like to see a plan on how we're going to do this.
I know our 2023, in talking with Mike, we've pretty much accomplished most of our repair and maintenance and much of our capital our projects in 2023. We're actually, we took a look at the 2022. We looked at the 2023 requests from clubs, and we're actually going to try and pull some of those, I think it's somewhere around 20 of those projects into 2022, so that we can, get as many projects as we want done. I'm not sure where your $9 million comes from, to be honest, but we are online to complete our 2022. As a matter of fact, most of them are complete. And so, again, I had this discussion with Mike. I was multiple times making sure that he could accomplish what we set out in our budget, and he's very confident that he can accomplish that.
Okay, I have to take your word for it, but the report that was given October the 19th says, outstanding 2022 capital projects, $2,645,000. Outstanding 2021 projects, $445,000. So,
well, some of that is,
if we've completed $2 million in the last month and a half, we're doing one heck of a good job.
well, some of that is, we've delayed some of the projects. So I know the HVAC was a big number that we're not going to spend until next year because it was such a increase in the cost of those HVAC systems. And then I know that the replacement of the fairway lawn bowls carpeting was something that was delayed as well. So that's roughly $1 million of that capital that's not going to be spent this year. And then we also have golf equipment that we typically, I believe their budget this year was $450, right? And so we typically hold off on golf equipment purchases till year end. So it's not work that we're doing, it's just purchasing equipment. So a lot of our capital is also just buying equipment as well. So I know we've got that left as well.
Yeah, I would like to just comment on the almost $500,000 on the carpet for fairway and lawn bowling. And when we did the capacity analysis and the utilization of capacity, we did not have good numbers. We did not have a lot of data based on the little bit of that we did have. you know, I don't think is a good reflection of what lawn bowling is actually doing. This year, we've been collecting utilization data, and it looks more promising, but it's hard for me to do my job as a sitting board member and to approve spending $500,000 when it doesn't look like we had the utilization to support that. So I think it was nice. It's a good idea to put it on the budget, but, you know, when it came right down to pulling the trigger and saying, yes, should we do it or shouldn't we, I couldn't in good conscience vote to support that. So hopefully next year we'll have better numbers, and we can make some educated decisions on that. So that's $500,000 right there.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Well, actually, not a question so much as I want there to be some clarity to make sure that I'm not confused and others might not be confused as well. Whatever was left over from 2021 didn't stay in building and improvements. It did. Well, maybe Bill can explain that to me so I can understand.
What page are you referring to?
Page 26 of the RCSC 2023 budget, October 19th, 2022.
So it's, you know, there's capital carry forward. In some instances, we've underspent, right? So that's a part of that capital carry forward. And one of the things that when I was director of finance, became director of finance, is we were carrying, you know, 5-6+ years back, and I stopped that. I said, we can go back, you know, -2 to see if, you know, that funding is required elsewhere, but that's it. So that's all I'm aware of, is there would be or it could be a project that was delayed, you know, by the board. I don't have it in front of me. I don't have the detail in front of me, but it's either a project that was delayed or it's money that we didn't spend because we came in under budget.
Okay, but that's even more confusing. Okay, because just because it was carried over does not mean it went into B&I. Is that correct? That future money could have gone anywhere, the carryover, correct?
The carry forward can, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now today, when you're talking about $4 million in the B&I, the reason why you believe that that can be done is because you've hired a second person to work with Mike, correct?
Correct.
And so you believe that that work can be done. But that is the amount of work you believe can be done. Whether it's actually fully completed by the end of 2023 will be a product of whether or not they actually got it all done.
That's correct. I mean, you know, in any given year, there's projects that are carried over, but I want to say that the B&I organization has done a really good job. Usually by fourth quarter, Mike's coming in my office saying, you know, we've done 90% of our projects are complete, and so that's why it's great, because then we can start pulling in some things if we're in an excess position to try and pull in some of the club requests into the current year that, you know, maybe would have been in 2023. So, and when we calculate carry forward, we make sure that, you know, any money that we expect to spend is deducted from any excess that we would generate in a current year.
Madam President.
Go ahead.
Yes, General Manager Cook, we appropriated a large amount of money for new golf carts last year. How much of that has been spent, and how many new golf carts did we get, and did we trade in golf carts to get them?
I'm going to pass that on to Brian here and answer that question.
Director Collins, those carts were ordered in January, or the end of December of 2021. At that time, we were given a lead time of 13 to 14 months. As of a couple months ago, I had called to get a status, and they had actually extended that into April. So we haven't received any yet, but we're trading in 25 carts at Riverview and receiving 26 carts from Club Car. I have had conversations with them recently. It sounds like their timelines moved back the other direction, And they're now talking possibly the end of December or into January for receiving the carts.
And that was for the total amount we had budgeted?
Yes.
Thank you.
Why don't
Okay.
you proceed? Yeah.
All right. If I could get the slide deck up. All right, so moving on to reserves. So just a reserves 101 definition. So reserves protect an organization from unplanned asset expenses and emergencies over time and are used for essential large-scale maintenance, repairs, and upgrades of assets, including large landscaping projects, repainting buildings, repaving projects, pool repairs, and construction of any new amenities. So there's, you can Google it or go online and you can talk to, folks out there that are in the industry, consultants, and you're going to get different numbers from the experts. And there's a lot of things that go into what your reserve balance should be. So it can be, if you look, it could be anywhere from 15% or up to 100% of your total asset replacement values and known major expenditures. And again, there's numerous resources. I mean, I've seen just, all kinds of numbers across the board. Now, that total asset replacement value is basically the listing of all of your capital assets. So we track those, and we have this tracking mechanism that is basically a 28-page spreadsheet that lists every asset that we've purchased. So it has the purchase price, the depreciable life, the remaining depreciation left on that asset, as well as what we feel is the estimated replacement value. And the B&I organization tracks that, and they work with our vendors to update, what we think the replacement value is. Okay, so that amount then is based on, whatever percentage you may want to utilize. 15%. There's some organizations that say you need to have 100%. All right. So again, it's based on your organizational asset replacement cost. Ours is $110 million, and I'll get into that. Expected asset replacement timing. So they have a depreciable life. So you may buy an HVAC system, and it may be depreciated at 15 years. So in our asset spreadsheet, we put in there that it's going to be needing to be replaced in 15 years. So if we put it in this year, it would be 2037 is when we would have to replace that. So in the spreadsheet, you would have that as a replacement required in that year. All right. And then there's an emergency likelihood and the preparedness that you need to be for any emergency. So it's likelihood of an asset failure or disaster, and then how prepared do you need to be, right? And then there's reserve studies, okay? So you can have consultants come in, all right, and they will conduct a study. They can do anything from just taking a look and making sure that your assets are correct, and making sure you're not missing anything. And when I came in as Director of Finance a couple years ago, I actually did that. I went out and I had Vern and I forget who else was with me, but I was up on rooftops. We were checking out all of our assets, looking at the asset tags, asset numbers, and making sure that our asset spreadsheet was correct. So we can pay consultants to do that. And then they can take a look at replacement value, and then they can come back and just do a full-blown, consult and just tell you exactly what they think your reserve should be.
Madam President.
So our reserve balance is 8.1 million, and that's our capital reserve at 5.6 and our operating reserve at 2.5. So I view that as our total reserve balance. So our total asset replacement cost, so if you look at that spreadsheet that I refer to, it's $110 million in assets. So we have almost 1 million square foot under roof when it comes to our centers. And so you think about all the HVAC systems, and you think about the roof and the parking lots and all of that associated with each one of these centers, that totals $110 million. So that represents a 7.4% reserve balance, okay? So those are our numbers. So if you want to just take a look at other community reserves, take a look at Sun City West. Their asset replacement cost is $95 million. Grand is $73 million. Green Valley is $45.2 million. Okay, so some of these numbers came directly from the GM, so we meet quarterly and we email and talk back and forth. Some of it comes from, their website. So Sun City West has a reserve balance right now of $27.5 million, or 29%. Now, their target, and that actually is their board-directed target, is 40%. Okay, so they're not at their target of 40%, but they are at 29%. Now, Grand, I don't know what their reserves are. I couldn't find their reserves, and actually their general manager was just recently hired. Their reserve target, however, is 70%, and I know Kevin McCurdy, our Director of Finance, got that directly from them. Green Valley Rec, their reserves are $11.4 million, or 24%, and I don't believe that they have a target defined. So what are the risks of being under reserve? So, unprepared for a catastrophe. I don't know if anybody was around when the sundial roof collapsed. What was that, how many years ago?
2006, yeah.
Thank you, 2006. Jan still has nightmares about that day, I'm sure. So, at that point, when that happened, we didn't really have many reserves, okay? So, all capital projects had to stop, and I know that there was a staffing reduction, quite a big staffing reduction, if I'm not mistaken, right? 15, 20% maybe? Something like that, that's devastating. That's roughly, 80 people, and 2/3 of those people are going to be Sun City residents, right? So, there was a delayed insurance. We had insurance at the time, but, insurance is not going to pay out right away. They're not just going to cut you a check. Okay, they're going to fight it, and they're going to try and find ways to say that it was your fault, or we didn't know about it, or the coverage doesn't count here, right? And then the coverage, in the end, didn't fully cover the cost of replacing that asset. Okay, I think it was somewhere around $800,000 that wasn't covered, something like that. Okay. And then amenity decline for members. So if you don't keep up your equipment, or you're not buying new equipment, the assets degrade, okay? And so HVAC systems, as we know here, we're replacing all the HVACs. They've gone up 50%, okay, since just 2 years ago. So we had budgeted for this in 2020 or 2021, the replacement of these HVACs, and they increased so much that we have to now do them in stages. Okay, so each one of those units is over $500,000 a piece, all right? And then we've got golf course equipment. We had the consultant come out here from the USGA, and the average turnaround on golf course equipment is roughly 5 years. And, we typically turn our equipment over 8 or 9 years. Okay, so the equipment does, and, it does degrade, and it shows. We had some issues with some of our mowing equipment not mowing, consistently. And so it shows because that equipment, is degrading, right? And then roofing. I mean, that's the last thing we want to do is, we don't want to see another roof issue, all right? Okay. So what are our risks, right? So what are the low risk factors? Why are we at a low risk? So our facilities are spread over a wide area, right? We don't have 2 or 3 of our facilities in one area, so if there was some catastrophic explosion or something, that we take out 2 of our facilities, right? So they're spread out over quite a wide area. And then we have really good insurance, okay? We have good insurance, and it does cover us at replacement cost. Okay, but there's no guarantee of coverage, right? And there's no guarantee that we're going to get a check in a year or 2 years. We don't know, right? And the settlement timing. So, those really actually are part of the higher risk factors. And so we don't want to be in a position where we can't, where we have to leave a center if it goes down for whatever reason. We don't want to have a center, unusable until we try and fight it with the insurance. We want to have enough money to at least get the repairs and the replacement up and running, and then we'll work out the battle with the insurance company. So what are the higher risk factors? Okay, so we have aging facilities. We're the oldest active adult community, right? We just look at Sundial HVAC. I mean, I believe it's 4 units, Chris, if I'm not mistaken, 5 units. That's $2.5 million for the units here, right? And then it's kind of funny. I was talking with Mike Weeper the other day, and we were doing some work on Lakeview, and we have all those beautiful columns that are around the facility, and you would think that they would provide some type of support, and the vendor who was doing some work for us said, hey, those things are hollow, right? So, these were built 60 years ago, and so there is a higher risk as your community or as your properties age, there's a higher risk that something could happen. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but that risk goes up, okay? And then our equipment, again, I point out that we notoriously keep our equipment longer than its life, which is a good thing, all right? We're saving money, we're trying to be frugal, all right? But then at some point, you do have to replace that equipment. And then rising inflationary costs, 8%, 8 to 10% this year, don't know what it's going to be next year. On $110 million in assets, an additional 5%, okay, is $5 to $6 million just in replacement costs for those assets. All right, so we just don't know what that inflation is going to look like next year. All right. So what is the reserve recommendation? And the question is 8.1 million enough? That's the question of the day. So the average size of our facilities is 51,930 square feet. Okay, so if I look at Mountain View and the cost to build Mountain View, or the redo of Mountain View, at 55,000 square feet under roof, it's $371 a square foot. Okay, so that's a pretty good indication of what it would cost us to replace any of our centers if we had to do anything. So if you look at the average, if we had a catastrophe, we're looking at $19.3 million. Now, are we going to have an entire facility go down? Probably not. But could you have a 50% catastrophe? That's still $9 or $10 million, that you would probably need in order to, recoup or recover. All right, so my recommendation, and I think from our perspective, we actually recommend $4.5 million at the budget or the Finance and Budget Committee, and that was not approved. And so what I'm saying is maybe we just take that to $3 million, okay, and transfer carry forward to the capital reserve. That gets us to $11.1 million, and that's 10%. Okay, so that's at least gets us into double digits in terms of having enough to cover, the total asset replacement value. So 10% is where we would be. And then maybe conduct a reserve study. Okay, that's not going to be cheap. I believe West did it, and it was somewhere around $70,000 to do a complete, full-blown reserve study. All right, and then we would set a policy on what that reserve number should be. Should it be 10%? Should it be 15%? I think a reserve study would be an objective way for us to determine what that number is. And again, we don't have to listen to that, but at least it becomes an objective method. And then what I think we should be doing is taking and using that capital reserve then as our mechanism to conduct all of our spending. So we would have whatever the number is, 10%, 11%, whatever the number is, and we would maintain that number, but we would always use that fund as our mechanism to do our capital expenditures for each year. So it's easily trackable, and then that way, we have that mechanism in place. I think that makes it cleaner, and I think it makes it very easy for subsequent boards and Finance and Budget Committee members to understand exactly how and what is flowing through that capital reserve. So that's it on the reserve side.
Okay. I just have a couple comments. I'm going to refer back to slide 11, showing the targets for the various communities and just where there's, and those are targets, but where people actually sit is, I guess, a little shocking that we're as low as we are. I don't know a lot about capital reserves, so that's very surprising to me. I do think, even in making a recommendation that I suggested to the Finance and Budget Committee to come up with some policies, but I think probably your recommendation to do a reserve, conduct a reserve study and get some input so we can make some suggestions is probably very well stated. Do you have any idea of what you think, based on what you've done so far, what a possible goal would be for a capital reserve?
My gut says 15 to 20%.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, it's just shocking, I guess. I guess I just didn't know enough about it to really know. Any other questions?
So are you saying that that 15 to 20% is in this budget?
No, it's not.
It's not, okay.
President Lair asked me for what I think a good percentage would be. I mean, even at 15 or 20%, we're at the low end of the, any consultant's recommendation.
Madam Chair. Go ahead.
Karen?
Yes. So while I appreciate the attempt to make this kind of to simplify the picture so that it's more understandable, I think that the situation is actually a little bit more complex than what we see here. Let me just give you one example for why I think that we're looking at numbers that ought not to frighten us the way that these might tend to do. So normally, in a capital reserve fund, you would have money, for instance, for replacing the roof at Mountain View or replacing the HVAC systems or for redoing something at Lakeview. And we're not having to do that now because we have millions upon millions of dollars in a PIF fund, and those items are scheduled for a complete knockdown and rebuild within the very near future. So there are monies, obviously, that are available in our PIF funds that might not be true of Green Valley Rec Center or Sun City Grand, that ought to be considered as a portion of the capital reserves that we have, because those monies will be used to completely replace aging equipment. And on top of that, we're actually funding a certain amount of that out of our current operational budget. So we have current operational budget. We have PIF monies that are available for handling capital issues that organizations that don't have PIF funds don't have access to, and therefore have to have a larger capital reserve fund. So I think that the situation is more complex than it's presented here, and I don't think it is as frightening as these numbers might lead us to think they should be. And I would actually also like for to simply point out that in May of last year, at the budget meeting, the general manager and the director of finance said that they would come back in November with a proposal about and a rationale for a reserve policy. And I was really looking forward to seeing that, and it never came. It didn't materialize. So as the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, I thought, well, what we need to do is to actually get some input on here from some professional input on this. And we have a member in our community who actually gets paid to train boards on reserve studies and reserve policies, and he has agreed to come and to meet with the Finance Committee and to actually give us some professional understanding of this, and he has actually asked for the kind of materials that would help to give us a fuller picture. We're not in a situation where the only way we can replace a roof or replace HVAC is through some fund called a capital reserve that we don't currently have. So this gentleman has offered to do that, and Bill, I was actually down in your office on Friday to try to talk with you about when we could schedule a meeting for that. Unfortunately, you weren't there, but that is on the agenda now, and I think it's a very critical piece of this. I think that we need to have some more professional and unbiased input into where we actually stand as a community. I am just as interested as the next person in making sure that we are being fiscally responsible about aging facilities, believe me. That's a high priority for me, and I think we need to get some really good input on this, and I would completely agree with the idea that a reserve study is essential for an organization like ours. And I have the impression that much of that legwork is actually being done because we have a really competent B&I guy in there who understands these things, understands that we can't always be simply reactive and fixing things when they break down, but instead we have to have preventive maintenance plans. But I do just want to say I think that the whole situation is a little bit more complex than the way that it's being presented here, and I would really encourage us not to make any decisions about a capital reserve transfer or anything else until we have more information on hand and more professional advice to help us make those decisions. Would also like to add one further thing, and that is it's just a question to you, Mr. Cook. So we're talking about taking out $2 million of capital reserves or of carry forward in order to meet next year's budget. How much are you planning to reinsert in that based on surpluses from the 2022 budget year?
From the 2022? Mm-hmm. So actually, our carry forward calculates that out, right? So it says, here's what our cash balance is. It takes into account all of the capital that still has to be spent, that's been budgeted, and then we also put in there what we think the year-end balance is. So that's all been calculated into what we think is going to be, I believe, a $10.7 million carry forward at the end of the year. And I don't know off the top of my head what the year-end excess is going to be, but we are doing our November financials as we speak.
Okay, but if I'm not mistaken, it's going to be somewhere around $2 million of an overage from this year's budget that we're going to be able to
That's correct.
Insert into next year's.
Whatever it is, when we calculate carry forward, that's incorporated into the carry forward number. So we assume that we would be somewhere around 10.7 million at the end of 2022.
Okay, does that mean that right now we're at 8.7 and you're anticipating upping that by 2 million to 10.7 million?
No, we have somewhere over 10, and we have usage of somewhere, whatever the usage is, and then you get the calculation every month, right? So we send that out. I can't tell you off the top of my head.
I just know that you've budgeted a $1.4 million surplus from this year, and I imagine that you intend to exceed that.
No, we didn't budget a surplus. We actually budgeted a deficit because we're using that money to finance our capital in R&M. So I believe we had I think it was a 1.4 deficit budgeted for 2022, and we're probably going to be somewhere around 1.7, I think, or something like that at this point.
I'm afraid I have a recollection of a different number, that there was an anticipated surplus this year of 1.4 million that was presented to us, at least on the Finance Committee.
Yes. So right now we're expecting an excess. I'm not arguing with you. But we budgeted for a deficit.
Right, okay. Well, what you budgeted, you budget in some way, and then you exceed the budget every time, and that's really...
We did discuss this. We talked about the golf carts. We talked about the lawn bowling, how that money ended up being in there and is now kind of sitting back.
I understand that, Dale.
The other thing I'd like to just say also is, when you were speaking, you talk about capital expenditures and the PIF budget. It's very different. We have a PIF budget, and we have major projects that go in here. When you're talking about capital expenditures, clubs, that sort of thing, that's not in the PIF budget.
Correct. You can say that the PIF is available for an emergency. However, then what do we stop? Because all of the PIF money is appropriated at this point, and quite honestly, when I did the 26-year look, within the next 5 or 6 years with all of the expenditures associated with Mountain View, our PIF goes down to somewhere around $3 to $4 million at some point. So, if we're at a point where it's only 3 or 4 million, then that's all we have.
So I
Well,
would like to just
I'm-
clarify there. I think you misunderstand, Madam President, that I'm not talking about taking money out of PIF that wasn't designed for capital improvements. What I'm saying is that normally in a reserve study, you would say, hey, you know what? You've got a facility there and the roof is going to go out in 20 years and there you have a facility. Well, in the PIF budget, we are already planning to knock that entire building down and to rebuild it with a brand new roof on it. So you don't have to include the anticipated depreciation of the roofing or other large expenses. And other organizations don't have that luxury. We do have that luxury. That's built into our system.
Every
that
Sun
we have.
City has a PIF equivalent. As a matter of fact, ours is, in some instances, it's 5,000. I believe Grand is 5,000. I believe West is 4,250, if I'm not mistaken. So they all have their own PIF as well. It's not called PIF, but it's the same thing. Every resale on a house generates that 4,250 or 5,000.
I want to say something.
Madam President, I'd like to come back to the annual assessment if I can and ask my question again, only in a slightly different way to see if I'm understanding. If you sequester more in a reserve for this risk percentage, does that mean you need more funds or you're asking for more funds because you've reserved that money and it's now not available for you to spend? Is that a fair question?
No, because the assessment is really from an operations perspective. So, that's our operational budget. So if we're taking, we have, 10.7 million. I think that's what we're budgeting for 2023 is to end with something just slightly above 10.5. We're taking 2 of that to cover our operational expenses for the year. And if we want to increase our reserves, we would take whatever that dollar amount is from the carry forward and put that into our reserves. While we have it, we should try and build our reserves.
And that was my question. That's what you're doing with this assessment, is you're trying to build those reserves.
No, it's the assessment is from an operational perspective. We have a carry forward now that has been built up over the last 7 or 8 years. So we're taking whatever was in that carry forward and putting that into reserves. At one point, prior to myself, I know Jan and staff and the board had appropriated roughly $500,000 a year that would be put into reserves to build up that reserve balance. Okay, and so that came out of whatever operational excesses that were generated for that given year.
Let John go, he was first.
Thank you. Now that I'm thoroughly confused, the idea of the reserve, I think, is great, and that sounds like we have a series of opinions on what should be. I'm sure there are people in the industry that could give us a presentation on what a low reserve means, what a high reserve means, and let us, the board, or the current board, or the future board, decide what it should be. Before I look at a study of, like West did for $70,000 on reserves, are we talking about reserve? Are we talking about sinking funds for equipment? I'm not sure what we're talking about anymore. I'm confused.
Well,
So,
I think that's part of the problem. I think, you have an operating budget, and that's run by our annual assessment. That's your salaries, the lights, the heating, everything else. Then you have major projects, our PIF fund, totally separate revenue source, and you've got that. And now we have our capital expenditures, smaller items, club maintenance, equipment, that kind of stuff. I think the recommendation, as I see it, is to, build up the capital reserve, and then when you're talking about capital expenditures, taking that money out of that area, I think it would just be cleaner all in all. I think it would be easier to track. It maybe would make more sense, to the members and to members of the board, which is one of the recommendations that, Bill has made.
Madam Chair, I might agree with you and I might not agree with you, but let's get the financial people that deal in this all the time to give us a presentation to show us what all this means, because I don't know.
Well,
We have
but one of
in
the
our budget,
recommendations.
Madam Chair, I think I have the floor right now. The, well, yeah, who's being rude? There are things that we put into our capital improvement budget that says reserve study. We have reserve study, we have reserve study, we have reserve study. Now, are those reserve studies for those items? Are they sinking funds for those items? I don't know what that means. I'd rather see someone that tell us what that means.
We have, do you want to answer what that means?
Yeah, so we have a reserve, okay, that currently today is appropriated money from the board that says if we were to have another sundial roof collapse, we've got money that would cover that, emergency. And then what we do operationally is we have capital, okay, that's anything, that's an expense over, what's our capital, 5,000? Yeah. So anything over 5,000 that has a depreciable life is a capital expenditure. So anything over that amount, we have to, whether we buy, kilns or we buy something like that, those things go through the operational budget on an annual basis. And typically we have, $2 to $4 million associated with those capital projects in an operational perspective. What I'm saying is that let's run all capital through the capital reserve, but we don't have to do that. I mean, we can do it, continue to do it as we do today, and just have a reserve. And again, the reserve is for anything that is any depreciable asset, okay, that's in any one of these buildings. So it's the depreciable life. So let's say we bought an HVAC system and it depreciates over 10 years. So that the spreadsheet would say in 10 years, we're going to have $500,000 available. So we would have some type of consumer price index, over the next 10 years, so that if it costs us $500,000 today, it's probably going to cost us $600,000 10 years from now. And we have that budgeted, and that would all run through the reserve. But today it wouldn't. We would just say, operationally, we need $600,000 to replace that HVAC.
Makes sense to me.
And I would like to address, Director McAdam, I apologize, but I didn't come away from our finance and budget meeting that Kevin and I were going to pull together a reserve analysis. I didn't have that takeaway. I thought that we were going to get together as a group to try and figure that out on how we wanted to get there. But if we missed something, I apologize. But that was not a takeaway.
It was in the minutes of the May meeting. But I just am wanting to ask for some clarification about this, because I think there's a little bit of confusion, and I really want to know. So right now, 10.7 million carry forward. You're expecting that next year we will be drawing 2 million out of that carry forward in order to meet the budget. But you're also expecting on December 31st of this year to be putting $2 million in surplus from the 2022 budget year into the carry forward. So if I understand that correctly, you would be expecting the carry forward balance to remain constant. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. Again, when we calculate carry forward, we include what we think the excess or deficit is for the current year. So that excess that we have for this year is already included in the 10.7. So we take the current cash balance, we subtract out any other capital expenditures that are expected for the year, and then we also add back in or take out any excess or deficit that we're expecting for year end. So our our carry forward for 2022, we're expecting it to be $10.7 million, which includes the excess for 2022. So with at the end of next year, our budget says that our carry forward would be somewhere around 8.7 because of we're going to utilize 2 million of that, of the carry forward. So it would be somewhere around 8.7, and then subtract anything else from that we would put into a reserve if we put anything at all.
Okay, I guess my concern there is that it seems like we're talking about a certain amount of money in account to fund a line item that is a derived number, and it's not as though we know that we actually have that money somewhere. If we're talking about a carry forward, I would have expected that to be an amount of money that we have set aside right now and would be identifiable as such.
It is identifiable, but it's just like if your home budget. If you have, you make $10,000 a year and you're going to buy a car at the end of the year, and you've got, $5,000 in your checking account, and the car's going to cost $1,000, that is included in what you think is going to be an expense at the end of the year. And you would also include whatever paychecks you're going to have at the end of the year. So we have checks that are outstanding that haven't been cleared that are included in the carry forward. So we have direct numbers associated with that. We have capital expenses that we have not made this year, and we're assuming we're going to make them at some time. So we subtract that out because we know that we're going to spend that money. So it is, but there is a cash balance that's on our balance sheet that's in the bank account that shows us what our total cash is. But that also includes expenses that we know are coming up.
Thank you. Mr. Cook, with the expansion of the Royal Oaks project, is there increase in money coming to us in the budget for 2023?
So we've had a discussion with them, we being Kevin and I have had a discussion with Royal Oaks, and they are aware of the fact that there is, a PIF requirement for them to, add additional housing units. So, but that goes to PIF.
But they also get each of the members buys privilege cards, correct?
That's correct. So they pay for half, and then the resident would pay the other half. So I believe next year, I believe that they were budgeting for an additional 20 or 30 units. So it's not significant from an assessment perspective, but it is from a PIF perspective.
Thank you.
Alan.
General Manager Cook, I want to make sure I understand a few things. So let's start with this. We have carry forward, which has 10.8. Under the budget at the end of next year, assuming everything goes up to plan, it would be about 8.8, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, you are not raising the rate to transfer the funds that you want to, whether it's 3 million or 4.5 million, to the capital reserve. Is that correct? Really, it's a transfer from one bank account to another.
That's exactly correct.
Okay, so basically it's revenue neutral, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, just a few other questions. I understand that the Finance Committee, which unanimously recommended the budget with the $29 increase, also made a decision to recommend that they not transfer those funds until we have a policy. I want to make sure I understand it. Once it's in capital reserve, we can only use it for capital projects. Is that correct?
Correct.
But the board has the power to change those policies, correct?
Correct.
So we could transfer the funds now and work on a policy next year, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'll continue to have some questions here. And my concern is not whether we call it capital reserve or something else. That's all fine. What I'm trying to figure out is what is the $29, where is the $29 increase going to go?
It goes to our operational expenses. So we, this year alone, inflation was 8%. So we're raising, we've hired a couple extra people to handle some of the B&I projects. Our wages are going up. So it's all of those expenses. And over the last 7 years, the inflation rate has been somewhere around 20, I can't remember what it was, 23%. And we haven't raised. So all of our costs are going up, but we haven't increased our income stream. So that's where it's going. Wages, seed, fertilizer, all of those operational items is where the assessment goes.
Plus, you're increasing some of those because you have another B&I person who's going to be performing more capital functions, correct?
Correct, yeah. We've increased headcount.
General Manager Cook, I want to make sure of a couple things. By statute, as I understand it, Arizona has raised the minimum wage. Is that right?
That's correct.
Do you know what it was and what it's going to be?
Yeah, so the state had, prior to this year, had Prop 206, which actually increased the rate above Consumer Price Index. But the statutory increase to minimum wage going forward is statutory. Is consumer, based on Consumer Price Index.
Do you know how much it's going to cost us from last year to this year?
I believe total wages across the board is roughly, we should have that in there, right? I think our wages went up about 12% with increases to headcount. So
Is it going to cost us, just a round figure, 10,000, 20,000, 100,000?
it's roughly 1.4 million, right?
That's the total?
Yes.
So if you take a 10%, you said it was 10 to 12%?
14%.
14%, so that's about 1.4,
Yes,
and in and of itself of an increase, right?
that's correct.
And that $29 is raising $750,000, correct?
Correct.
You know how much, just a ballpark figure, fuel and heat has increased in the last year?
Well, everything across, I mean, we're way over budget when it comes to fuel this year. I can't tell you the percentage, but it's double digits.
So in reality, that 29% is just trying to deal, even though it's not dealing 100%, it's trying to deal with inflation. Is that right?
That's exactly what it is, and we're not even covering. It's a 5.85% increase. Even Social Security has gone up, is got their their price index increase for 2023 is 8%. It's unprecedented. It's the highest that I think it's ever been in 1 year. So everything's going up.
Did you include the increase of what we're going to have to pay on Social Security in that 1.4 million, or is that separate?
No, I don't believe those rates went up.
No, I
The
understand.
contribution rates did not go up.
Yeah, but the increase in salary would cause an increase in Social Security taxes.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Madam.
I would like to clarify a little bit. As you all know, I have bragged about the fact that the annual assessment has not increased in 6 years, and while I was on the board for 4 of those years. Now you're hearing that the annual assessment needs to go up, be raised $29. That's $29 for the year. That translates to $2.41 a month. And if you remember, Director Levinsky just recently said that over 6 years, it translates to about 50 cents a month. That still keeps us in one of the most affordable retirement communities in the nation. So let's be realistic. You know, and I know that prices go up over time. Knowing that fees cannot stay the same forever, we have to prepare for the future. I tried to share that info with you recently when I read a list of expenses that RCSC has incurred during the inflationary prices we are dealing with in our own lives. And RCSC is not exempt from that. You might also remember for the first time I voted yes on this issue, and then the next time I voted no. Well, I was hoping to spur up a conversation that would help you, the members, get a deeper understanding of the budget, which is what we're trying to do today. I think we need to spur this conversation. We need to have this conversation so you understand that we're not, our general manager, our past general manager, Jan Eck, and our current general manager have done a fabulous job, obviously, because we have not raised fees in 6 years. They mentioned the sundial. And if you go back, I went back and I had a list of how the fees have been raised over the last 17 years that I've lived here. And over 17 years, it's only gone up $166. Over the first 4 years I was here, it went up, what did I say, it was $120, I think, about that, because of the sundial collapse. I think had a lot to do with that. My first year it went up $30, and next year 20, then 16, then 24. After that, because they were able to give that capital reserve, but they were able to try to make up for that mistake, it has not increased that drastically over the years. I think they're doing a wonderful job, and I think we need to keep it up. And remember, if $2.41 is going to cause somebody to lose their house, then they're doing something wrong. I'm sorry. And there are places out here that we have people here that can help. We have the Sun City Foundation, we have Sun City Can. There's a lot of places, people that can help these people if they need anything. Thank you.
Madam Chair. Thank you. I guess my biggest objection to the increase is not the increase, but how it was presented through the process. If you didn't go to the Budget and Finance Committee, you didn't know it was there. It was not presented across the board as an actual increase. There was no information given to it. A couple other things that I have some issues with in some of that is, in past history, the board took the responsibility to look at things like golf fees. The board had to approve them. Last year, the board was asked whether or not they'd like to increase the 401k contribution to our employees, and do they deserve it? Absolutely. But it wasn't asked of the board this year. It wasn't asked of the committee. It was built into the budget. I guess if my job as a board member is to rubber stamp the approval of the committee and of the staff, why am I here?
Okay. John, I understand what you're saying, but the problem that we face is that next year, if we want to make reforms in the way that we do budgeting, we can do that. We're faced with about 3 weeks before the year runs out, and we need a budget. So if the budget meets the requirements that need to be done for next year, let's pass it this year, and let's make the reforms we need to, if that's what's needed, next year. But let's not defeat the entire budget because we don't like the process. That's my view.
I'll stop.
I just had one ask for Mr. Cook. You said 1.4 million. That is just for our people that were at minimum wage, to raise them up to the new minimum wage?
No, and actually that's the difference between 21 and 23. I'm looking at the budget reports that were sent out. But no, it's the 8% minimum wage, but it's also an increase for across the board for those that are really across the board for just about everybody on staff. So we're doing an increase for an inflationary increase. Because if you raise the minimum wage, then all of a sudden somebody who's been here for 15 years is now making the same amount that somebody who just started at minimum wage. So we have to make an adjustment for everybody else who is not making, that is above minimum wage.
Okay, so that's total wage increase?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, no further questions, no further comments. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
This is a copyrighted production of the Recreation Centers of Sun City Incorporated and is intended for the sole purpose of informing our Recreation Center members. Any duplication, copying, transmission, broadcast, or use, including electronic and social media, is strictly prohibited without the prior written consent from the Recreation Centers of Sun City Incorporated. Thank you for watching.